Are WeakAuras confusing and intimidating to you and you have no idea what you're looking at whenever you download somebody else's WeakAura for wago.io, or you have some my WeakAuras, your own WeakAura, you have whatever's going on, you want to make your own? What's going on with these WeakAuras? A lot of times when you download them, which is what most people do, they're confused and they can't even interact with them. So for the longest time, whenever I would go online, I'll have links down in the description to wago.io. You can search across all classes and dungeons and whatever type of WeakAuras you're wanting. They have a ton over there. But they're really confusing to move around, and how do I customize it? Because this right here is Luxthos. He is the king of WeakAuras, and this right here is unusable for me because my abilities aren't laid out like this, and how I move them around and all this other kind of stuff. I need to be able to customize them, so I've gone through a big journey that I'm now going to share with you guys of how you can figure out what these things are, and this is a little tour guide walkthrough tutorial on the basics of WeakAuras and how to navigate through this thing and understand the language that is this WeakAura code. But I'm going to teach it to you real easy. I was a teacher for 11 years before I went to jump into this full time, so I'm going to teach you guys some WeakAuras. So starting things off, these are my WeakAuras. This health bar is not a WeakAura. This is Shadowed Unit Frames, if you're wondering. And this is Dominoes. I have a Dominoes bar down here. I always get those questions. I will have full videos on that here in the next couple weeks. But all of this right here, this is my WeakAuras. All of this around here's my runes are WeakAuras. All of this. So here's how this works. You first of all type /WA and the WeakAuras comes up. Now you're going to see this is my UI, and this is a little something we'll talk about here in a second. I have something, a little free package for you guys to be able to make your own WeakAuras. We'll talk about that here in a second. But whatever pops up here is the first little section I'm going to show you. Is you have a loaded section and a not loaded section. All of this are for my different classes that I have, Demon Hunters, Death Knights, all that kind of stuff, right? This is a WeakAura I have right here for my target. Whenever I have a target, these are some auras right there. Whenever you click on these WeakAuras, you see how whenever I'm clicking on different ones, they are popping up and going away? Well, this is because these little green eyeballs right next to it, right? These little green eyeballs turn them on or off. But as you notice, this one is constantly on. I can toggle these on and off and leave them permanently on so that no matter what I target and click on, they always stay on, or I can toggle them off and I only get selected if I'm actually on them. That's a little super simple thing. Now, if you want to load or unload things, all of the loading capabilities are inside of these loading tabs. So if you go, I'm going to my Demon Hunter. If I go to the loading tab in my Demon Hunter, it has all these crazy things about how they load. The only thing you need to care about is see player class and talent specialization. This only loads when a player class is a Demon Hunter and their talent specialization is Vengeance. Super easy. But we'll get into more loading things in a second because we're going to go to my current setting right here, and the load settings for this one is a player class is Death Knight, talent specialization Blood. It's showing up. How great is that? Because that's when I want it to show up. But before we get into all of this, I want to click new aura up here in the top corner, because if I wanted to start a brand new everything, a lot of these are in groups and dynamic groups. So here's the start of your little tour here. Pre-made auras are going to be very nice for anyone that wants to actually create something with a little bit more complexity to it and not have to make it from scratch. So if I want to do an icon and I can click default, it has different sizes. That's all that changes here for the sizes of this. I do a default icon, and this is going to pre-make and automatically make you any sort of buff you have, debuff ability, covenant abilities, all this kind of stuff. A resource bar. All this is very, very simple. You have certain things for your certain class that you are. So even if you want to do a very simple ability button, and let's go ahead and do something really simple like Dark Command, which is a taunt for Death Knights, you have options here. So these are very self-intuitive. You just read them. Basic show on cooldown means it's going to show when it's off cooldown. So thinking through this is only going to show this ability whenever the ability is on cooldown, which is weird to me in general because I want to see when I have it. So that's weird. So it would show, hey, it's on cooldown. And then I don't like that. Only shows the aura when the ability is ready to use. Oh, that's interesting. So it shows the icon, but then as soon as I use it, it's not ready to use. So it would hide it. That's a possibility. Cooldown tracking always shows the aura, but it turns blue whenever it's not usable. Interesting. Highlight while debuff. This highlight option will make it glow whenever it's available, and this one shows when it's on cooldown and it turns red if you're out of range, which is a little bit more so for abilities. They're attacking abilities. I'm just going to click this, so I have my big old gigantic taunt button, and I'm going to press enter. You see how it automatically added it to my thing right here because I had it selected at the very beginning. Whenever I clicked this, I had this selected and I clicked new aura, so it added it into this group right here. But if I don't want this to be part of a group, I can press this left arrow and it pops it out to the big entire thing. If I want to drag it back in, I can drag it in here and put it back into the group right there and popping it back out, all that kind of stuff. So now this is independent. It's all right here. It's this big, huge, giant taunt button. And if I go over here and I can taunt something, and now it's taunted, but now it's glowing whenever it's taunted, which was weird, but it's only glowing while it was active. So while I had the taunt debuff on the target, I'm even going to do it again. While this target has that taunt debuff on it, it's glowing, meaning it's in effect, and then when it's gone, it's on cooldown, it's recharging, and then we're back. So super simple. I'm going to delete this because I have my UI already set up. So I'm going to do a new aura again. These pre-made auras are a good way to do this. You have different textures and different progress textures. Progress bar is a really nice thing. You can do horizontal bars again for all of your abilities. If you have some sort of debuff that's on the target, if you're a warlock and there's a dot that you want to track on the target, you can do that. If there's a buff on yourself you want to target, you can do that. Buffs are things on you. Debuffs are things on them. Both of them together are called auras. That's how this whole thing, the verbiage of all of this goes. And abilities are your actual cooldown based abilities. Cool. Now back to this main thing. All I did here was click new aura. You have groups and dynamic groups. Dynamic groups are a little bit fancy. Things shift and bump around based on how many things are in there. I usually stay away from dynamic groups. It's a little bit too advanced for me right now. I might make a video on that in the future. Groups is pretty much what I do. You can see these are groups. This is a group. It statically stays there. Everything you populate inside of this group is going to move around together all as one. Icons create all those little icons like you just saw. Some sort of 3D model if you want to do that. I've never done that before. Progress bars are what we just shown. All of that. We're going to get into all of these individually, but this is where all of this comes from. And if you ever want to import anything, right next to the new aura button is import. You click import. You can go to wago.io. I have that stuff down in the description for you that we'll talk about here in a second. You just copy paste it in there and then it's going to pop up on your screen immediately. Lock positions is going to be things that are not moving around, and you just lock everything in so that nothing can be accidentally moved. And then magnetically align is kind of something that helps you be able to organize things and like snap them to each other. That's nice if you're trying to line up certain things and kind of click them in like a little puzzle. So that's the whole setup up there. A lot of people didn't know about this too, so I hope that helps. But now let's go into these actual things. But one thing I'm going to do here is I want to set up this. This is my Dungeon Coach WeakAuras setup package deal thing for you guys. This is going to be down in the description, and next week's video I'm going to do a full video on how to make a custom UI for yourself for any class whatsoever that you want, and I'll walk you through the whole thing. There's a whole little probably about 5-step process that you can go through and make your UI, which is how I made my Death Knights UI that's in front of you right now. This UI was built live on that video. It's edited and quickly cut to make sure that you can actually follow through and make your own video, make your own UI alongside that video. But what I have in here is a package of every single kind of weak aura you could possibly want. A resource bar, whether it be mana or fury or whatever type of bar that you want. A vertical orientation bar tracking some sort of buff. So if I have a buff that's up, I have some sort of defensive cooldown on myself and it lasts for 10 seconds, it's going to go away over time. I have an aura of something pops up and I want to have an aura when I have a buff to let me know that I got the buff. There it is, a super simple aura. All you do is copy these, paste them in there, and you're going to be able to make all of these auras. I've named them all for you, but again, that's going to be next week's video. I'm going to be walking through this week's video for, in fact, the standard ability right now. Now, back to the tutorial. For the display settings, this is true for every single weak aura that you can find. Every single one of them has display settings. No matter which one I click on, all of them have display settings. So at the top, you're going to see the icon's color and the desaturate and stuff. Desaturate means go to grayscale. So whatever color the icon has, it's going to desaturate it. But in general, you don't want to have the icon be default desaturated. We're going to talk about triggers and conditions here in a second, but this display is the default display that it's just always going to be at. Imagine if you had nothing else that you did, it's just going to look like this always. And then the triggers set up some modifiers for that, but we'll get into that in a second. So the icon dynamic information is usually what I have, because based on the triggers of what you say, since I said Sigil of Misery here in the trigger, I'll get to those in a second, it's going to dynamically choose that icon. No problem whatsoever. If you want a fallback icon, you can go in here and there shows nothing. Like, wait, but there's nothing. I can type in whatever I want here. I can type in Sigil, and it's going to populate and load whatever type of search is for Sigil. Now, I also populated a lot more things besides Sigil, but it's fine. Here's the Sigil of Flame, Sigil. There's the Sigil of Power. I don't even, Sigil of Power, what is that? Anyway, maybe that's another class. Sigil of Misery, there we go, and I have the Sigil of Misery. I can choose that and say okay. I'm gonna choose something random for right now, like this little Kyrian icon, or this Necrolord icon, and say okay. And right now, as you see, it still doesn't show that. It's still using the dynamic information. You can change this to fallback icon, and it now makes that ability the whatever fallback icon that you have selected. But in general, I'm going to backspace this so I don't mess up my WeakAuras. And now the fallback icon's nothing, and I'm going to change it to dynamic information. Great. And you can also change things to trigger ones and stuff, but we'll talk about that once we get to triggers. Extra zoom. This is important because a lot of times, if you like the look of if you like the look of a regular button, like if you just literally ripped it off of the WoW interface and had a little gray outline and all that stuff around it, then you can have a zoom 0. I like zoom 30 because it makes that button pop a little bit more, and it makes it look a little bit bit cleaner and has a nice clean, crisp edge around it, which is what I have in my UI. So that zoom 30%, you can zoom even more if you want, but there you go. Alpha just means fade. In general, just vocab wise, alpha means opacity basically. So 100% alpha, it's all the way there. 0% alpha, it's gone. It's invisible, right? So there we go. So there's your extra options. And then all of this, I in general leave this exactly the way it is. Swipe and show all these other things. It's a little bit more fancy than I'd want to get into on a general tutorial. You don't have to worry about these. Inverse changes it to where instead of loading up, you see how the icon now is bright and then as it's loading, it's dark where it's loading and then now it pops back up. I like to select inverse because it's dark because the ability is on cooldown and it's brightening up until it's now ready to go and it's all bright. So I have the inverse setup. If you unclick that, it makes it dark on the low, which doesn't really make sense to me. I guess it's a bright icon and then it gets dark while it's on cooldown, and once it's all the way dark, then it pops back on cooldown. That feels weird to me, so I'm gonna leave it right there. Position settings are huge whenever you're messing and moving around with these things, and this is gonna save your butt from being confused all the time. And anchors. So width and height is the width and height of the size of this thing. I like the default 34. That's usually about the size I use, but you can change this width and height and make it whoa all crazy. And you can also type in here 34 enter. You do have to press enter to press all of these things. Anchored to, you can anchor these things to your mouse cursor, to nameplates. You can anchor them to certain things. I always say screen/parent group. I have the anchor be the center, and it's in the center and it's done. A lot of times, some things, if you're moving around, it keeps jumping all over the place. It can get confusing. This is maybe one of the culprits, or it could be in condition, but we'll talk about conditions in a second. And ultimately, that's all you need here. But now we're getting into the background, text, and glows and stuff. So how this works, it's like a stacking hierarchy thing. The further down the list it is, the higher on the thing. This is a stack. This is the bottom of the list right here is the background. Then the text is on top of that. Then the glows on top of that. Then the border. Ooh, actually, this is wrong. I'm gonna fix this here for you guys. Glow should be on the very top, because look, if I click show glow, you can see this little black outline. My editor's gonna have to zoom in on this. You see this little black outline around it. That means the border is on top of the glow, which is not good. I want that to be the highest up. So I'm gonna say move up, move down. I'm gonna move it down. Now it is on top of the glow. So the glow is now on top of that black background. Okay, great. A lot of times if there's a text that you want to see and the text gets overlapped by the glow and then that looks bad, you can make sure that the text is in the upfront most so that the text is the highest up. And you can add text and glows and borders. I like to add these certain things in here, but for text, this is where you can show text or not, depending on what it is you want. This right here, hold your cursor over it. You can see S means stacks, P means progress, which is what you might use most of the time. But in general, the text is going to be default made, especially if you have WeakAuras that are already made for you. You can format this further, but the size of the text, the type of text, and you can really get into some of the specifics here with like shadow box text and offsetting the text. All things having to do with the text are right here. Then after you get through this text drop down, you get to borders. Show border means I like having a little bit of a border, and you can see, let me turn this glow off so you can see it. You see this little border here? This border is kind of outlines it. I like to have a pixeled, a full square border. Actually, I usually do pixel border and I have it be a 1 or a 2. So there you go, 2 pixel, the border color is black, and we're good. There's a lot of other borders here. You can also offset the border for some reason. I don't know why you'd want to do that. There we go. And there's the border, and after border is the glow, which is action button glow. You can have the you can have it be an auto cast, which looks like that, or a pixel glow, looks like that. I like the big glow right there, but I'm going to turn it off because this, again, in the display shows you the generic default thing. If you want it to always be glowing, you can have it always be glowing. I don't know why you'd ever want it to always glow, but in general, most buttons are going to have this off, and there's going to be some sort of condition that makes it glow, which we'll get into. So then that's default there. You can also change the glow color, but there's that. So now we have the hierarchy here. All of the display is now explained. So we're going to get into the triggers now. So for triggers, this can be kind of confusing, but again, how this works, the display shows the basics of what the button does. So the trigger is setting up what things trigger this ability to do stuff, right? So for this case, since this is a standard ability, the trigger 1 is a spell because it's tracking a spell. You can track auras. Again, auras are buffs and debuffs, which are both, right? So if I did click aura, it's going to talk about player auras and buffs and debuffs. We're going to go through this whole thing. So for the aura, we're talking about player. We can talk about arena, wherever we're at. We're raid buffs, all these other things. In general, we want to talk about player buffs. Maybe this is a buff of your party, maybe this is a buff on your pet, but we're going to talk about player buffs, and this is a buff or debuff, a debuff or a buff, and you can choose whatever's going on there. But in this case, we're talking about an ability or a spell. So for these spells, you can track a lot of different things like its cooldown, charges, or what its count is, if it's usable, is the cooldown ready or not, all this kind of stuff. In general, this is the option that you're going to have most of the time, but you can set up a bunch of different triggers. These triggers are just saying what's going on so you can follow along with it. And this is now where it's actually asking you to name the spell. This is a spell, and I type in Sigil of Misery, and it changes to Sigil of Misery. If I type Sigil of Chains, it's going to press Sigil of Chains, if I spelled it correctly. But I don't have Sigil of Chains, so I'm going to do Sigil of Flame. But I'm not a demon hunter, so I'm going to do some other ability entirely. Death Strike. There we go. So now I have the ability of Death Strike. There's the icon for Death Strike. It automatically updated the icon and all of that stuff based on this dynamic information we talked about a second ago. Now I have Death Strike there. I thought I was a demon hunter for a second. You can also track and have other things be the trigger. You can also make this more and more specific, because right now we're as general as you can get, and it's just the cooldown of Death Strike. It's very basic. You can have the remaining time be, it only triggers and shows up at certain remaining times left on its cooldown, which in general I keep off. Charges, if your ability has charges, how many charges? Does it have more or less charges than something? If you have an ability that has 2 charges, you can set it up to where you are tracking only if it's equal to the first charge 1. Right, and then that would be tracking the charge 1, and then you can do another one that's tracking charge 2. But in general, I mean, Death Strike doesn't have charges, turn that off. And this show button is also important because it's always showing, or it's only showing if it's on cooldown, or it's only showing if it's not on cooldown. Kind of like the conversation we had before about those auras. When do you want this to show up? I want this button to always be there, and you see how it's red? We'll get to how it's red here in a second too. Is I want it to always be there, and when it's on cooldown, I want to see it, and when it's not on cooldown, I want it to be gray. Because again, all we're tracking is this thing's cooldown. So I want this to always show. Certain things I could see if it's valuable, if it's available, like maybe if it's a trinket or something and you want it to be right in the middle of your screen when it's available. Then you could show if it's not on cooldown and it means it's available, you could show it right there and it only shows up whenever the thing's available and then it goes away if not. Or vice versa, you only show it when it's on cooldown, which always just felt weird to me. So anyway, I'm always going to have this on always, and that's my trigger. So the trigger for this ability is this. Now, stay with me on conditions because this is usually what gets people confused, but I think I'm going to hopefully make it clear for you. Conditions modify the trigger and certain things happen. So based on these triggers you set up, it lets you do cool things with the conditions. You might want to track certain triggers of if this happens, or if this happens, or if this happens. And you set up these hypothetical situations about these different triggers, and then these conditions act on things and make things happen based on these triggers. So for condition 1 to show you right here is insufficient resources. Let's say back in the day when you had mana and stuff and you don't have enough resources or runic power in this case, so Death Strike actually is a good candidate here. If trigger 1, let me open this up here. Okay, hold up, I don't want to get ahead of myself. I'm going to add a condition. So condition 4 here. If then, very simple, if then concepts. If this happens, then this is going to happen. So this is how all of them work. If all of these options, lots of different options, if a combination of options happen, if a global, if it's always true, if you're in combat, if you're all, whatever, right? But most of these WeakAuras are going to be based on a trigger. So that trigger 1, if we think back to what that trigger was, that trigger is the spell of Death Strike. So we're talking about Death Strike, right? If it's active, if it has charges, if it's insufficient resources, all of these different types of things. If it's on cooldown, if the spell's in range, all of these different things are going to be based on the trigger 1. So for this, it's going to be if this thing happens, then something else happens. You can make it add a border to it under certain conditions. You can make it glow on certain conditions. That's cool. There could be text that pops up on the screen if then something happens, right? I'm going to delete condition 4. And we're going to look at condition 1. So if there's insufficient resources, and this is the whole thing I want to also help explain here. True or false statements is a big thing in coding. It's basically yes or no. So insufficient resources is the question. And if I say true or false, think of it as like yes or no. Are there insufficient resources? True. That means yes. I asked you, are there insufficient resources? Meaning, is there not enough resources? Yeah, there's not enough resources. Then we're going to color it blue, showing that if there's insufficient resources, and that's a true statement, there are insufficient resources, it's going to color it blue. This would be asking, is there insufficient resources? No, there's not insufficient resources, which that's weird to even wrap your head around. So to help with that, I'm going to show another condition. I'm going to add this condition here. I'm going to shut this down. So if you're in combat, how about this? If you're in combat, I want this thing to glow whenever I'm in combat. Ooh, wow. So if I'm in combat, and the answer to that question is true. Does this make a little more sense, hopefully? Am I in combat? Yes. Or am I in combat? No. See what I'm saying? So in combat is yes. Ooh, I am in combat. Then it's going to glow. Ooh, and I'm going to turn on the visibility of the glow. If I don't turn on the visibility, it's going to make it not glow. So, ooh, the glow. And that's what the check mark is for the visibility and what type of thing's going on there. So this is a cool condition. Is if it's in combat, yes, it's going to glow. Awesome, cool. All right, anyway. So if insufficient resources are true, then the color is going to turn purple because it's kind of like showing in blue. Second condition is if it's on cooldown. If trigger one right here, if it's on cooldown, see where I'm going with this? If it's on cooldown and the answer is yes, so yes, it's on cooldown, then it desaturates, meaning it turns gray, and it grays out and it grayscales it to where it shows no color. It shows the icon still, but it's just no color. And the third condition is if the spell is in range, I like this for a lot of abilities. If that's false and it says no, the spell is not in range. Hopefully this true false thing makes sense now. Then it's going to change the color of this thing to red. And that works great. So that if see how it's red right now? I'm not in range. But I get in range. Oh, hey, cool. There it is. This is perfect. Oh my God, this is perfect. So look, this is red because I'm not in range. I can't cast Death Strike from this far away, but if I get in range, now I'm in range, so this condition is no longer true because the spell is in range. So condition 3 is no longer apply. Condition 3 does apply, it's red. Condition 3 no longer applies, I'm in range. But what is applying is condition 1. See the color blue? This has a little bit of a blue tint to it because I don't have enough runic power because I'm not even in combat yet. I haven't built up any resources. So it's red. Now, if I start to attack things, watch it right here. I'm going to attack. Ooh, now it's light. It's lit up because I have enough runic power. And I use it, and now it's gray. And now it's grayscale, and I don't have enough runic power. And now it's red because I'm out of combat. You get the picture. So there's those conditions. Now we're going to go into this the glow ability. So now I have another ability here. This ability, an ability on a Demon Hunter where whenever it's up, you want to use it, right? So whenever it's up, I want to use this hot off the gate. So again, I still have the same conditions. Condition 2 is on cooldown, desaturate, yeah. Condition 3 is the blue thing we just talked about, yeah. Condition 4 is if you're in combat, ooh, we're going to get into condition 4 right now. So condition 1 is if it's on cooldown and the answer is no, meaning it's available, right? On cooldown is false, means it's available. Then it's going to glow. See, the active ability right there, right? And it's going to glow and it's going to be the action button kind of glow and all that kind of stuff. Great. Okay, cool. If I had that be where if it's available, it's always glowing, that's not good. So that means I have to add another condition. And the final condition here is if I'm in combat and the answer is no, right? So it means I'm not in combat. It's asking the question, are you in combat? And the answer is no. Then it's going to turn the glow off. If I had this on, you see how it's always glowing now, constantly, no matter what? No. If I'm out of combat, I don't want it to glow. But as soon as I enter combat, it's going to start glowing. Use it. See what I'm saying? So now looking down here at progress bar stuff. So progress bars, you're going to have the different progress bar settings. Progress bars are very, very useful for a lot of things. You can change the type, style of the look of the progress bar. If it goes right to left, up to down, all that kind of stuff. If it has an icon on there or not, I do like this icon, right? So this right here, it shows the icon. You can set it to where it doesn't show the icon, but I like this vertical thing to be some sort of buff. This is the buff I have, and it has this much time left on it. Or this horizontal progress bar is a much more simple progress bar. Sometimes if I have things with two abilities, 2 charges on here, I can turn on both of these eyeballs and you see how they're right next to each other. So this is charge 1 of an ability, this is charge 2 of an ability, and they fills up together, right? So how this looks is you can have the progress bar. I don't have the icon showing on this and you can change the position of where the icon's at, all that stuff, the image of what the icon is, everything. But this is all the same stuff as far as the interface goes, the position settings, the text, all that's the same. Triggers now. The trigger is the same cooldown or spell, power or radiance, awesome, and it's always showing, cool. Conditions, no conditions. But if we go back to the trigger, you see these extra options right here. If I click extra options, it's tracking the actual cooldown, showing the cooldown of charge 1. Certain things can be charge 1 or charge 2, charge 3, how many ever charges of whatever you have. You can track individual charges. So this one tracks charge 1. This one tracks charge 2. That's also another really cool thing here is in WeakAuras, if you are ever going through here, if I go to conditions over here and I go to this one, it's going to go to the conditions of this one. It remembers where you're at in a certain WeakAura and goes to that exact same spot in another WeakAura you click on. So if I'm looking at charge 1 right here and I click click on the display and I scroll down and I want to look at the position settings and I simply click the other one, it's going to take me to the exact same spot. I'm not going to have to hunt around back for the same spot. Whereas if I go to triggers and I want to look at the charges and I go back to the other one, it shows me the other one, or jumps all over the place, or whichever WeakAura I click on, it's showing this exact spot within that WeakAura because all of the interface is the same. So I'm tracking charge 1 with this one and charge 2 with that one. Simple. And I have a 1 progress bar for one and 1 progress bar for the other one. And now its cooldown is represented by a bar instead of an ability with a little clock ticker circle icon on it. And there's a bar there that can show where all your cooldowns are. You could turn all of your cooldowns into bars. That'd be a really strange interface, but you totally could. Also, these auras are cool. You can select an aura. Again, this would be select the aura. You go to texture right here, and you have a texture, and you have this aura right here. I'm just making this one from scratch. I have an aura I've chosen. You can have the display, and again, you can choose what the display looks like, and it has this whole option here. You can choose all of this, because this isn't an ability anymore. This is a texture, and you click this file, and you can choose all kinds of textures, all kinds of textures. You can desaturate it, which grayscales it. You can keep it the same. You can put a color filter on it. Again, the display is the general setting for what this icon looks like, and then the trigger and conditions change that. Mirror flips it around back and forth. You can rotate it around, all this different type of stuff. You can change the opacity on it, all that. Again, all of these are the same, but I go to the trigger and I want this to be tracked based on a buff. So whenever I have a buff of some kind, so you can select the buff name and you can type in the name here. So for myself, I'm gonna do Crimson Scourge. I'm gonna click OK, and this is now tracking the passive ability of Crimson Scourge. Death Knight auto attacks have a chance to proc Crimson Scourge, giving you a free ability. Awesome, cool. Now, this is only gonna show up when Crimson Scourge has triggered. Does that make sense? Whenever I have an aura on myself as the player of a buff of this, that is what's happening, right? And then another thing that clicked, a lot of times this is clicked, it's your own buff. If somebody can't give you a buff, or maybe your own power word shield versus some other priest power word shield, depending on what kind of things you're tracking. But that's where all this comes from. And then the conditions, I don't need any conditions because all I need is the trigger. If there's a buff on me, I want to see it. There's no conditions needed. Now, if I want to add a condition where, like, if I'm in combat, then if I have if based on the trigger, I totally could add those conditions. But in general, I don't need to. And this image will pop up if the trigger is triggered. But I'm going to delete this now because this is not part of my little package deal that I want to give you guys. So there we go. Okay, now for actions. Actions, I don't mess with this at all. This is super fancy people stuff. In the actions thing, I'd leave actions alone. Animations, though, you can get kind of fancy with animations. If you want to have it have some sort of preset animation, you can have it bounce or something. And see now the ability's bouncing now. Constantly, this ability will bounce if it's available. If it's triggered, and this is going to be triggered all the time because I have the ability, I have the spell Death Strike. It's just going to be a bouncing little Death Strike now, which is super annoying. Flash, you can make it flash on and off, and based on certain things that you want, you can make a pulse and have to come inside out. A lot of times these pulse and flashes are going to be like if something's happening or if I don't have something or whatever based on the conditions and triggers. I want it to be like in my face with it, right? So anyway, in general though, you can have this be none, and you can have a start or a finish to the action as well, but there's the animations are kind of cool. You can also have it be a custom animation, and you can get real crazy with some stuff here, but I stay away from that. Load is huge. This load thing is you can load things if it's in combat or not. Instead of having the condition be about combat, you can have it be here to where if I only want it to be in combat and this load tab trumps everything. This will not even load it. If you click never right here, never loads this thing. So no matter what the conditions and triggers are, never makes it to where you never see this thing load ever. You can have all of your interface load only if you're alive, and all of your interface just shuts off if you die. That's interesting. As you see here with all of my interface options, all of my WeakAuras, I have all of these selected to be red, meaning it does not activate. It does not load if you're in a pet battle, a vehicle UI, or you're not in a vehicle. Okay, cool. And this red means false also. So it means, oh, I'm in a vehicle, it loads. Oh, I'm not in a vehicle. Okay, cool. You can load things based on group type, player realm, of certain players, certain actual characters that you want to have. A lot of times people use this. Player class is a big one. Lots of times you can have, oh, only load if it's a demon hunter, only load if it's this. If you want to have multiple options, you can click it one more time, and you can have multiple different classes. So maybe you have certain tanks that you only want to load for tanks, all that kind of stuff. And you can do talent specialization, class specialization, all this kind of stuff. Talents, a specific talent. Only if you have chosen the talent Blood Drinker will it load. So if I have a WeakAura about Blood Drinker, I might want to come in here and have the load condition be if I have Blood Drinker, right? Because I don't want to load something that I don't have. Does that make sense? Turning that off. PvP talent selected if I know certain spells. Player Covenant is a big thing for Shadowlands, not so much in the future. If you have a certain race, certain faction, level, whatever the things are, you have lots of different load conditions. Custom options are not going to be here unless you're using somebody that made some custom options. A lot of the WeakAuras prepackaged made by professionals have custom options. Check these custom options, because a lot of times when there's a lot of complex stuff going on, custom options are going to save your butt as far as all the different stuff here that it has inside of these custom options. And information just lets you know kind of what's going on if they have a URL or a description or something that somebody made from online. Timeout. There's two more things that I realized later on after filming that I wanted to share, because these threw me for a loop when I'm going in trying to get other people's WeakAuras and try and tweak them and match them to myself. Because sometimes the colors don't match up, or I move them and then they move themselves whenever I click out of the window. Because if you might want to move something over here and then whenever you back out, it's like not in the same spot anymore. So one thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to one of Luxthos's WeakAuras. Again, very well made WeakAuras. I'm going to go to something that is a specific thing, and sometimes whenever I want like a talented thing that you don't always have and so I would move it and then it would keep like resetting itself to a different location, different than where I set it. So I was very confused. Anyway, here's where it is. Go to conditions, and you might be overwhelmed at first with all of these conditions, but hopefully after watching this, you kind of can read it a little bit and know what's going on. So if we look at the first condition, on cooldowns false, and it's something about glow, and this has to do with glowing. So nope, it's not condition 1, unless I want to mess with glowing, then I can mess with that. Something about combat and glowing and combat and bringing the alpha down. Okay, cool, still not that. Condition 3 is desaturating if it's on cooldown and all that. Okay, cool. Condition 4, any of it triggers, and trigger 3, trigger 4. Wow, this is very confusing, but if you keep going, then relative X offset. Now we're talking about moving. So it's going to move it X38 to the right every time something with other triggers happening. Whoa. No, I'm going to delete that. And now it's gone. And then I can check to condition 4. Oh, it has a Y, another X offset based on some other type of things, depending on whatever, because it's probably in a certain location, and based on other things you choose, it moves around, which is great if you want to use the UI as default, but terrible if you want to use the UI in different ways. So you can also delete condition 4. So now whenever I move it, it's great and exactly where I want it to be. So there's that for moving things. But then I also had another problem with my generic default setup here. This is again the one that's down in the description. These progress bars, I would change the color of the progress bar, but then it wouldn't change the color. Like I'd log out and come back in and it would be yellow again, but then I'd move it and inch it around sometimes and it would change colors back to a different color. So and if you notice right there, it was a yellow and it changed to more of an orange even just now, because there were conditions. And if you went to the conditions, there was a bunch of different conditions based on charges and stuff. And it was like a cool gradient and it looked really nice, like a cool looking gradient. But if I went over and I deleted all these conditions, except for an action, I did not see this. See this aura, a region bar, set gradient. Ooh, that's a color thing. I know what a gradient means. That's a color thing. And then it has some sort of color code for what the color code is. So I'm going to delete this whole thing. And then now whenever I'm going to even uncheck that box. Now whenever I go to the display and change the color, and let's say I want to make it teal or something, now it's going to stay teal instead of always keeps yanking back to yellow. So there's another thing to kind of check and look for stuff as far as words go. Hope that helps. Timeout. I'm adding 2 more things here onto this just for you guys to help out with whatever type of WeakAuras you want here with this Dungeon Coach WeakAura setup. These 2 extra ones right here are abilities that only show whenever they are off of cooldown. They only show whenever they're available to use. Big tanking cooldowns, healing cooldowns, damage cooldowns, all the big cooldowns you want to see. I'm going to show you what this looks like on my Demon Hunter. So I'm going to copy both of these and paste them on down to my Demon Hunter's WeakAura. All right, so if you can see this now, I have both of these. They're all overlapping over my original WeakAura. So this is going to be the only show when available one, and this is going to be the alert one right here. I'm going to show you the differences between all of these. And I have my original Firebrand WeakAura right here. This is just a standard Firebrand. It's going to show the cooldown whenever I use it. It shows the cooldown. It's a very normal standard ability button. Right here, these 2 do very different things. For the first one here, show only when available. I'm going to make this a little bit bigger. I'm going to put it like right here. So it's going to stay there on the screen, but it's only going to be there if the ability is available. It's going to be nice and big. In fact, I'm going to put it like right here, so I know I can use Fiery Brand if I see this is up and online. And then this one is a little bit faded. I'm going to make it actually really big right here. This is going to be a type of WeakAura where if you want something to alert you when something comes off of cooldown, that's what this WeakAura does. So how this works, the show only available, the very simple change that I did. Everything's the same as compared to these regular abilities, this regular Fiery Brand down here. All of the things that are already there. The only difference I did is I went to trigger and I went down here, and instead of for show, instead of always show, which means it's going to show when it's on cooldown, show when it's off cooldown. Instead now, I switched this over to not on cooldown. So it's going to show if it's not on cooldown, meaning available, right? So that's the only difference here. So whenever I go to show when available, you can see this is the show when not on cooldown. So right here, that's what this one does. The thing for this one here is, you see it's a little faded too. I went to display on this one and I changed the alpha here to 80%. You could even go down to like 70% or so and have it be just a nice faded little reminder, oh hey, the ability's off cooldown, and it only lasts for 2 seconds. How you do this one, if you want to make it for yourself, you go to trigger, and the trigger is, instead of the trigger being a cooldown change charges or count, which is what all of the other ones are, I switched it to cooldown ready event, which makes sense. It's the cooldown ready event. It's ready, and it lets you know. So I have this spell that I want to let me know about, and the time is going to be 2 seconds, and it's going to stay on my screen for 2 seconds and then go away. So here's what it looks like whenever everything's all gone now. You see how it's all gone and they both disappeared? Now, in the case of this one right here, whenever I enter combat, it appears. And I set that WeakAura to only appear on combat. Again, let me just go to show you that. As soon as I leave combat, it's going to go away. And well, this all popped up. So I did the WeakAuras. Let me show you what I'm talking about. So I'm not in combat. Now I am in combat. It's right there. And whenever I leave combat, as soon as combat drops, it goes away. So there we go. Now to bring up WeakAuras. So how you get it to do that is this one specifically, I only want to see it when I'm in combat. I go over to load. In combat is now green, so this one only loads whenever it's in combat. That makes sense. Now, how this other one works here. So if I'm in combat, I'm fighting, I know I have Fiery Brand available. In the case, some of you guys might not want to have this here, and you might only want to have, like, you could remove all of these. You could remove all of these, like, bigger tanking cooldowns in your trinket, and you could just have a button right here, and it shows that, oh, let me get back in combat. It shows what you have, what tanking cooldowns you have available. You know you're about to take some big damage, or you know about to want to do some damage, and you know what you have available to use. You can use them, and when you use them, it goes away, and you see how it went away. And there's my other WeakAura that shows the duration left on it, 5, 4, 3, all that kind of stuff. And now I'm going to show you, it's going to keep going, and now 50 seconds left, but the reason why I like this one that comes up on the screen really high right here, and just as a little flash for you, is I might not remember what's going on. I might not remember that I have 40 seconds left on it. I'm not staring at all these things. Lots of stuff's going on. I'm tracking all these other things, all these other glowy abilities. I'm pressing and jumping on, doing things, and I might not know. So it's going to show, and I'll show you what it looks like. All right, cool. I'm not paying attention. I don't know what's going on. I'm fighting stuff. Oh, there it is. Flashed and gone. See what I'm saying? Right there, it showed me, hey, you have it back now. Now, again, these are very redundant. I would not recommend having all 3 of these. You have this one and this one and this one all in similar locations. You might want the flash to be like really close to your character. You might want it to be up here and even bigger. I don't know how you want to do it for yourself. Of whatever you want to let yourself know, hey, this is available. So how I'm probably going to do it is I'll keep this here, I'll have the little flash pop up there, and that's about it. But if you have something with more cooldowns, or this is getting a little congested over here, you could move all of your tanking cooldowns off of this to be right here, and have a nice really high spot up here to show you what's available that only shows up in combat. And maybe you want to put some tanking cooldowns down here further to let you see the abilities that you want to be able to see what cooldown, like knowing that you have 40 seconds left, 30 seconds left, or something off in the future. There you go. I hope that helps. That also is going to be in this little WeakAura package here that I've put here for the show when abilities only, and the ability off cooldown alert. Both of those are now added in there, and you're good to go. So I hope this gives you the big picture display of what's going on here with all of this stuff. This entire WeakAura package right here is going to be available down in the description. You can download it for free, all of that stuff. Next week, I'm going to do this just gets you started. In the same way that your new aura and you made pre-made auras and all of this stuff, you click icons, this gets you started. I wanted to do a little bit simpler way. I think this is simpler at least, and it has the exact type of thing on here, and you can know what type of thing you want. But if you want some more help with that, next week's video is going to be literally over this exact thing and going a full walkthrough of how I made a UI from start to finish. and how you can do the same thing for yourself no matter what class or spec. I do it with a Blood Death Knight. You could easily do it with a Holy Priest. This is available for free down in the description. Check it out. If you want all of my WeakAuras and you want this custom setup to where I have any character, if you ever watch me stream, I stream here on YouTube. If you ever watch me stream and you want this WeakAura, if you do want to help support what I do here and take it to the next level, you can go to Patreon. On my Patreon, I have all of my WeakAuras, all of my add-on UI updates. You can get everything that I have, my Raven UI, my Dominoes UI, all of these things to help get your UI in tip-top shape. So until next time, stay creative. Think outside the box. Peace.